So right now, growing your own food is obviously a very important thing, and there are many ways to do it, many different things you can grow. But it is absolutely staggering or outright shocking how much food one person basically needs for an entire year to feed them, let alone times that by 2 or 4 or whatever's in your household. So we're going to look at that shocking number.
When you break it down and really look at it, one human eats a lot of pounds of food a year. We kind of did a lot of research on this, and we actually did a video similar to this time last year, which we'll link above. Since then, we've done a little more research and gone a little deeper. We managed to find a study from 2011. So take in mind, this is 10 years ago, and I have a feeling that people consume more now than they even did 10 years ago. This study was done by the United States Department of Agriculture to find out just how many pounds of food the average North American eats in a year. That number came down to 1,729 pounds a person. It seems like the going kind of consensus is between 3 to 5 pounds a day per person. So that puts you anywhere from 1,095 pounds up to 1,825 pounds. So we're going to work with the 1,729 just for the purpose of this video and also for our garden planning this season. Last year, after doing our research, we kind of aimed for a ballpark of thinking that we needed about 2,000 pounds per person. And to be honest, when we calculated out all the stuff that we grew last year, we kind of thought that may have been a little bit high. Interesting to go through now that we have a bit more detail and really kind of break it down into categories as to what we grew compared to what the average person eats. I think I'll go through the numbers first of what the survey said, and then we'll maybe talk a little bit about how we did in our garden this year and kind of do a little comparison because it's kind of interesting. Main component that made up people's diet, surprisingly, was dairy. Cheese, milk, yogurts, ice cream, all dairy products basically made up 630 pounds of that total weight for the year. Now that's something that, interestingly enough, hopefully we can improve on this year when we start milking the sheep, but stay tuned for that. Next was vegetables at 415 pounds. This included things like corn, potatoes, carrots, all vegetable product. Next in the study was fruits at 273 pounds. Then, a sad fact, sweeteners was next at 141 pounds a year of sweeteners. I found that just unbelievable. So that's going to be a tough one for us, although we do have some ways, but still. Meat was 185 pounds. That's meat, poultry, eggs. And last was fats and oils, making up 85 pounds of that total year of food. When you really break it all down like that, it's really interesting to see those categories and start to see the areas that we could improve, maybe where we grew too much, and we're going to talk about that next.
So obviously with those numbers, that's basically what the studies found the average North American had eaten. That doesn't necessarily mean that every single one of those categories, I'm going to put it this way, should be eaten in that amount. And there are lots of other ways to break this down aside from weight. You can look at caloric intake or calories, for example. So there's definitely things to consider there. And I think as we kind of go through and look at what we grew in 2021 versus these numbers that we've been able to dig up, I think we're going to find that some of them may be a little high and some of them may be a little low. And we'll kind of talk about that next. I have a cheat sheet before I get into the next part because there's a lot of numbers here. So there's no way I was going to memorize it all. But if we do some extrapolation and also some looking back at 2021 and what we grew, using that number per person, if we times it by 4 for a family of 4, that equates to 6,916 pounds of food to feed a family of 4 for 1 year, which is a lot of food. That is far more food than most people think they actually need because people do that a lot. They go, well, why'd you grow so much? Well, we're going to go through that. In 2021, we took impeccable records, I'm going to say, and in total we grew 3,155 pounds of food. Now I will say off the front that pretty much that 55 pounds kind of comes off that total because of our sunflower mishap, which we'll link the video above. In the grand total, we fell short of that 6,916 pounds by approximately 3,761 pounds. So we did really, really good, but we were a little less than half, basically. When we kind of break this down, I think that point that these figures are based on what the average North American does eat. It's not necessarily based on what the average North American should eat. So there's 3 of the 6 category breakdowns that I'm going to say we did fairly well in. That's meat, fruit, and vegetables. So the breakdown for these, if you use these figures, is an average family of 4 should basically be growing or would consume 740 pounds of meat. Well, in 2021, we grew 495 pounds of meat, so that does include eggs. I am going to say it, I still feel that the meat number might be a bit high, but it's a good starting point, and we may go into that in a future video in a little bit more detail. So the next 2 are fruits and vegetables. So I'm going to talk about them separate, but I do think they're a little bit hard to separate. Fruit, if you extrapolate for a family of 4, it was 1,460 pounds. 2021, we actually didn't do too bad. We were able to grow/forage 581 pounds of fruit. Now, we can definitely do better with that, and fruit is kind of one of those things you have to improve slowly over time because a lot of it does come, not all, but a lot of it does come from perennials. But vegetables, so I take this, the study wasn't super clear, I take this to be what you would sort of think as more normal garden vegetables. So we have included things like squash and tomatoes in this, which technically speaking are fruit, but in most people's minds they kind of equate to the vegetable component, so there's semantics. But the average family of 4 needs about 1,666 pounds of vegetables. Well, this is an interesting one because in 2021 we grew 2,118 pounds of vegetables, so we were actually quite a bit higher than that figure. And this is where I think things don't this is not necessarily a benchmark to be aiming for, but these numbers do give you a really good idea of what, in a rough sense, you probably need to be aiming for. So if we combine the fruit and vegetable categories, just to simplify this a bit, the calculated of what a family of 4 would eat is about 3,120 pounds. So that's almost as much as what we grew altogether with our meat included in that in 2021. So we fell short on the fruit and vegetable category by approximately 421 pounds because obviously we grew a lot more vegetables than fruit, because our combined total for 2021 was 2,699 pounds for fruit and vegetables. So fruits and vegetables, definitely some discussion here, but we've done pretty good. We are well on our way. Before I get into the next 3 categories briefly, I do suspect that fruits and vegetables is probably a category that, based on these sort of statistical numbers of what is consumed, i.e. what's purchased, are probably things that when you're growing for yourself, you may eat more of them. Increasing the production of those things is not necessarily a bad thing, even though it doesn't quite align with these numbers. And another thing which is a little hard here, and again, it wasn't super clear in the studies, look at ketchup, for example. We're not sure if the study, and maybe it's in there, we just didn't dig far enough, but we're not sure if the study actually looked at how many pounds of tomatoes it takes to produce X amount of ketchup, or if it just looked at the volume of ketchup that was consumed, because our ultimate volume was sort of the raw tomatoes coming into the house. So you cook it down, etc. So the volume of the end product you get is less. So there's lots of ways to interpret this data, but in the grand scheme of things, I think we've done fairly well. So the last 3 categories are categories that we really, with the exception of one, we really didn't produce any. I'm going to just call it that. And that's, so the first is dairy. Now, of course, in 2021, we produced 0 dairy. So if you do the extrapolation, the average family of 4 needs 2,520 pounds of dairy. That does seem a little on the high end to me. However, at the same time, milk's a liquid and liquids are fairly heavy. So I still feel that's probably higher than what we would consume. But that's something going forward this year. We're going to see if we can track a little bit better. The next one is sweeteners. Now, I think this one's a really, really tough one because it probably is coming from a lot of very processed foods that tend to have these in it. One of the things that it talked about was basically per person consuming 42 pounds of corn syrup. Well, we all know kind of where that might be coming from. So I'm not so sure that 564 pounds for a family of 4 is a real accurate value on that. And even though we did produce some sweeteners in the form of the sorghum syrup, etc., we don't really have good records on it. That was the one piece, because just the way that transpired, we don't have a great handle on that. So that's something we're going to have to continue to work on, and we do have some plans for that. And then the next one is fats and oils. And again, I think this number is a bit high. It was for a family of 4, it ends up being 340 pounds, which oils are liquids again, so they are heavier. These 3 categories, in my mind, may be the average of what the average North American consumes, but I'm not sure that it's necessary in the volume as to what is consumed. And they may be able to be sort of substituted. I think the grand total weight is probably not too far off. There is room to eat more fruits and vegetables as opposed to some of these other items. Even though, as we've shown with our geese, there's value there, and it is something you can produce yourself. So that's kind of a walkthrough. It's a yearly thing for us, I guess, to go and try to mine this information more.
It's a glimpse into how our minds work.
Exactly. Like we say, we had done some research last year, but we went a little deeper this year. We may go even deeper in the future. It's really interesting to look at these numbers, which, again, are still, I think, are open for interpretation for your own use. But to use these numbers and use it to plan your growing. I'm not going to say just gardening, because it's growing in general. But it's also interesting when you can look back on a previous year or previous years of the eventual goal and see how you did in relation to that. I'm pretty sure we're going to continue to dig into the information and adjust the quantities, but I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that a family of 4, and this is, again, a little less than what we had assumed last year, will require somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 pounds of food items. It's vital that everybody grows something. We do still think this is important, because sometimes when you're planting your gardens, you can find that you can actually grow a lot more than you think you can, even if you have small spaces. So stay tuned, because we are basically going to use this as a bit of a benchmark to help us plan our growing season for, I mean, we're already underway a little bit, but to help plan our growing season for 2022. So stay tuned as we do a little bit more of a deeper dive into the planning, the reflecting on 2021's growing season, and looking forward to the 2022 growing season to get into full swing.